You won't believe how far a cashier went to frame an old man, especially after everything that man had done in secret to help others. Welcome to Johnny Boy Storytime. Before we begin, please hit the like button and subscribe so we can keep sharing powerful stories just like this one. Thank you. Let's get back to the story now. Christopher Lane pulled into the parking lot of his family's flagship grocery store in a quiet working-class neighborhood just after 10 a.m. on a rainy Thursday morning. The lot was about half full, the usual trickle of mid-morning customers filtering in and out with canvas bags and quick glances toward the sky. Chris sat behind the wheel for a few moments longer, watching the rain bead across the windshield, then shut off the engine and grabbed a worn gray raincoat from the back seat. Beneath it, he wore an old flannel shirt, jeans scuffed at the knee, and a faded baseball cap pulled low to shade his eyes. He'd grown a short beard over the last few days and deliberately dulled the polished look that made him recognizable in the business magazines that occasionally ran features on his meteoric rise. The disguise wasn't elaborate, but it didn't need to be. Few of his frontline employees had ever seen him in person. To them, Christopher Lane was a name on emails, a signature on paychecks, a smiling face on the company's annual newsletter. But to Chris, this wasn't just a visit, it was an investigation. His grocery chain, Lane and Local, had been his passion project, built from the ground up over the past 18 years. What had started as a single organic food co-op in Vermont had exploded into a small, but respected chain of 27 locations across New England. The values hadn't changed: community-first policies, family-friendly pricing, and respect for every customer. But lately, Chris had felt that something else had. Reports from certain stores showed dips in satisfaction scores, and this location had received the most complaints: dismissive staff, long checkout times, and questionable refund practices. And that was what brought him here today, under the radar. Posing as a customer named Dan, his plan was simple: return a box of stale cereal without a receipt and observe how the staff handled it. But nothing could have prepared him for the reality waiting inside. As he stepped through the automatic doors and into the warm, fluorescent-lit store, he was greeted by the faint hum of music and the rhythmic beep of scanners at the front lanes. The store looked clean, if a bit sterile, the produce stacked in neat pyramids and the aisles organized with military precision. He spotted the customer service counter just past the registers and made his way there, clutching the cereal box under his arm. A young man stood behind the counter, idly drumming his fingers on the laminate surface while glancing at his phone. The badge on his chest read Justin, Shift Lead. He looked to be in his early 20s, thin-framed glasses resting on a sharp nose, and a headset looped behind one ear, more decorative than functional. Chris approached and cleared his throat. "Hi there," he said, keeping his voice relaxed and friendly. "I bought this last week, but it's stale. I didn't keep the receipt, but I was hoping to get a refund or maybe store credit." Justin barely looked up. "No receipt, no refund," he said flatly, gesturing toward a small sign on the counter as if it were the 10 Commandments. Chris raised his eyebrows slightly. "I understand policy, but this isn't exactly a high-ticket item," he said. "I shop here all the time. I'm not trying to scam anyone." Justin sighed dramatically, clearly annoyed. "Sir, we have rules for a reason. If you didn't think to keep your receipt, that's not our problem. Otherwise, what's to stop anyone from grabbing something off the shelf and claiming it's old?" Chris bit his tongue, resisting the urge to push further. Instead, he smiled faintly and said, "Fair enough," placing the box gently on the counter before turning away. He wandered slowly through the store after that, watching interactions quietly from behind half-stocked end caps. A few of the employees seemed genuinely helpful. One older man in the deli smiled warmly as he explained the specials to a young couple, but many others moved like they were just waiting for their shift to end. Chris noted one particularly worrying interaction when an elderly woman asked a young female cashier for help finding a product. The cashier, clearly impatient, waved vaguely in a direction without even pausing her phone conversation through her AirPods. Chris scribbled a note on the small pad in his pocket. Customer dismissed, no follow-through. But what caught his attention most was a cashier at lane 6. A young woman with dark hair pulled into a messy bun, thin glasses perched on the bridge of her nose, and a beige apron slightly too big for her slender frame. Her name tag read Maria. While her register line was longer than others, the atmosphere was different. Her tone was gentle, even as she worked quickly. I hope your son feels better soon, she told a worried-looking woman buying cough syrup and tissues. This brand is good for sensitive skin, she told an elderly man buying detergent. Chris moved closer, pretending to browse a nearby stand of chips, but listening carefully. It wasn't just customer service, it was something more. She cared. Then, a small sound reached his ears, not a beep or a voice, but a soft whimper. It came from just beneath the counter at Maria's station. Chris peered subtly and was stunned to see a small child, a boy, no more than 4 or 5, sitting on a folded blanket behind the register. He was bundled in an oversized hoodie, his cheeks flushed and tear-streaked, a half-eaten granola bar clutched in his hand. Maria glanced down at him between customers, offering a whispered word and a gentle touch to his head. Chris's eyes narrowed. There were no complaints, no comments. No one else seemed to notice. Then he saw it. A subtle move. Maria reached into her bag, pulled out a small reusable container, and placed it discreetly next to the child. Inside was a sandwich cut into neat little triangles. The boy sniffled, wiped his face with his sleeve, and began to eat quietly, hidden in plain sight. Chris's heart twisted. The boy looked exhausted but safe, and the quiet routine of Maria's movements told him this wasn't the first time she'd done this. Just as Chris turned to walk away, he heard a voice, sharp, judgmental, and familiar. Seriously? You brought your kid again. It was Justin, the same shift lead who had denied Chris's refund. He stood at the end of the lane, arms crossed and eyes narrowing at Maria. You know the rules. He can't be here. This is a workplace, not a daycare. Maria's smile didn't falter, but Chris could see the tension in her posture. I didn't have a choice today, she said calmly. His babysitter canceled, and I couldn't afford to miss another shift. I keep him quiet. He just sits there. Justin snorted. Keep it up, and you won't have shifts left to miss. You're not paid to play mommy at the register. Chris felt a fire spark in his chest. It wasn't just the cruelty, it was the hypocrisy. Justin, who couldn't be bothered to make eye contact with customers, was lecturing someone who was doing her job and quietly raising a child in the process. Chris stepped back, out of sight, breathing deeply to collect himself. He wasn't ready to reveal himself. Not yet. But one thing was certain. This store wasn't just failing customer service standards. It was failing its people. And Maria, she wasn't the problem. She might just be the key to everything. He pulled out his notepad again and wrote 4 words in bold, dark ink. Watch her. Help her. The late morning sun filtered through the diner windows, casting long shadows across the checkerboard floor as Paul Bennett, still deep in disguise, sipped slowly from a lukewarm cup of coffee. He had arrived just after the breakfast rush, selecting a corner booth with a full view of the front counter and register, his makeshift command post for silent observation. His order had been simple, black coffee and toast, something he hoped wouldn't draw too much attention. As he watched employees move about the space, Paul began cataloging each interaction, comparing them with the values he thought his company embodied. So far, he'd seen a few minor infractions, a cook texting behind the counter, a busboy half-heartedly wiping down tables, and a hostess giving customers a somewhat forced greeting. Not ideal, but nothing he couldn't chalk up to fatigue or a slow morning. What he didn't expect, however, was the emotional storm that would blow through the front door 15 minutes later. A woman in her mid-30s entered the diner, holding a crumpled receipt in one hand and a small pink backpack in the other. Her expression was tight, weary, not angry, but determined. Trailing close behind her was a little girl, perhaps 6 years old, in a faded jacket 2 sizes too big and cartoon-themed sneakers with frayed laces. Her face was flushed and streaked with the remnants of recent tears. Paul watched as the woman scanned the room and walked directly up to the counter where a male cashier, Tyler, according to his name tag, stood tapping on the screen of the register with one hand, his other occupied by a half-finished bag of chips. He barely looked up when she approached. Hi, I'm sorry to bother you, she began, voice tight with nerves. I was here last night with my daughter. We got home and found out one of the burgers was raw in the middle. She got sick after eating it. She paused, shifting the small backpack awkwardly in her hand. I just wanted to get a refund. I know I should have come back last night, but I couldn't. Tyler finally looked up, annoyance already creeping into his features. You waited till the next day, he said, dragging out the last word like it was an accusation. And you don't have the food? Just a receipt. Yes. The woman nodded, her voice faltering. I didn't know what else to do. It's just that, my daughter. Ma'am. Tyler interrupted, his tone flattening. Company policy. No food, no refund. Anyone could walk in here with a crumpled piece of paper and say whatever they want. You want a free meal? Try McDonald's. His voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp, and it cut through the room like broken glass. Paul felt a slow burn begin behind his ribs. The woman's eyes welled up, but she stood her ground. It's not about a free meal. I missed work this morning to come here. My daughter vomited all night. I'm not trying to scam anyone. Please. Tyler gave a performative sigh and glanced at a coworker, a young girl named Jess, who had just returned from delivering coffee to a booth. Can you believe this? He muttered to her, loud enough for Paul, and likely half the room, to hear. Wants money for imaginary food. Unbelievable. Jess, clearly uncomfortable, gave a non-committal shrug and avoided eye contact with both the woman and her colleague. The little girl tugged gently on her mother's sleeve, eyes wide and damp with fresh tears. Mommy, are we going to get in trouble? That's when it happened. A second cashier, a woman with gentle eyes and a short, practical haircut, stepped quietly out from the back room. Her name tag read Maria. She'd been organizing receipts and balancing the previous day's drawer totals. Paul hadn't noticed her before. She came forward, placing a hand softly on the mother's arm. It's okay, Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper. Why don't you and your daughter have a seat in that booth by the window? I'll bring you something warm. On me. The mother looked stunned. But I'm not asking for anything else. Please, Maria said, gently ushering them. Just sit. You both look like you could use a break. Tyler scoffed from behind the register. What are you doing? You can't just comp people food, especially not scam artists. Maria turned toward him, her voice steady but resolute. She's not scamming anyone, Tyler. She's a mom. She's tired. Her kid is sick. We're a diner, not a courtroom. Paul's heart raced. He watched every detail. The tension in the mother's shoulders, the way Maria knelt to hand the girl a clean napkin and a chocolate milk, the way Tyler threw his hands up and stormed toward the kitchen muttering about soft people running the place into the ground. It was the starkest contrast Paul had seen since going undercover. One employee dismissed a struggling woman and mocked her child. Another chose to quietly care for her, regardless of company policy. Maria didn't know she was being watched. She didn't know that the man in the corner booth scribbling quietly in a pocket notebook was her boss. But her actions spoke louder than any employee review or quarterly sales report. As the woman and her daughter sat and began eating, Maria sat with them for a minute, talking to the little girl about her favorite cartoon and folding a napkin into the shape of a swan. It was subtle, it was kind, and it shook Paul more than he expected. Later, when Maria passed by his table, Paul stopped her. That was really kind, what you did back there, he said, keeping his tone neutral. Maria looked a little embarrassed. I hope I didn't step out of line. It just felt like the right thing to do. Paul smiled gently. You have a good heart. The place could use more of that. He watched her disappear behind the counter again, this time smiling slightly as she worked. Across the diner, the little girl was laughing softly, her earlier tears replaced by chocolate milk mustache and tiny, hopeful grins. Her mother sat straighter now, eating slowly, cautiously, but visibly relieved. Paul's coffee had long gone cold, but he remained seated. His notepad now held not just notes, but names. Names of people who needed to be confronted, and names of those who deserved so much more than what they'd been given. And for the first time since going undercover, Paul knew he hadn't just come here to watch. He'd come to change everything. By the time the late lunch crowd trickled in, Paul Bennett had already committed every corner of the diner to memory. The squeaky hinge on the front door, the dull flicker of the overhead light above booth 6, the way the vent fan near the kitchen buzzed faintly when the fryers hit full temperature. All of it painted a far more intimate portrait of his business than any financial report ever had. What had started as a curiosity, a quiet return to his company's roots, was now evolving into something far more urgent. Paul had come undercover to learn, to reconnect. But what he'd seen so far was exposing cracks in his foundation, not just in operations, but in people, who they were, what they stood for, and how they treated others when no one was watching. And now, he needed to go deeper. The real test, Paul believed, wasn't always in how employees acted when the boss was around. It was in the minutes between rushes. The exhausted sighs. The grumbled complaints. The whispered gossip in the back rooms. That's where the truth lived. He shifted to a counter seat under the guise of finishing his notes and sipping more coffee. Maria had already refilled it without being asked. Tyler had vanished into the kitchen, leaving Jess to manage the register. Paul noticed her anxiously watching the clock, likely counting down the minutes until her break. She looked young, possibly in her first job, eager to please but wary of conflict. She had remained silent during the morning incident, and Paul wondered whether it was fear or apathy. Either way, she wasn't the one he was here to watch now. He was watching Tyler. The swinging kitchen doors cracked open briefly, giving Paul a glimpse of the man through a sliver of greasy plastic window. Tyler was leaning on the prep counter, phone in hand, thumbs swiping rapidly. His apron was stained with ketchup or possibly something worse, and his hairnet sat lopsided on his head. Next to him, one of the cooks was visibly frustrated, waving a ticket in Tyler's face while gesturing toward a sizzling griddle. Tyler didn't even glance up. Paul stood and stretched, then casually made his way toward the restroom, which conveniently passed by the staff hallway and break room. He lingered near the door, pretending to fumble with the lid on a coffee cup. That's when he heard it. "I'm telling you, man." Tyler's voice came through clear. "Maria's gonna get us all canned. Feeding random brats from the street, comping food like she's running a soup kitchen. If this were corporate, she'd be out in a heartbeat." The cook said something muffled, to which Tyler responded louder. "She thinks just because she's older and talks sweet, she can do whatever she wants. That lady today, she had scam written all over her. And the kid crying? Please. They know exactly what they're doing. Free lunch on sympathy." Paul's fingers tightened around the coffee cup. His jaw clenched as he forced himself to remain still. "I'm just saying," Tyler continued, "we're supposed to follow rules, not run some feel-good charity program. And if Maria keeps pulling that crap, I'll make sure Patricia hears about it. I've been waiting for her to slip up." There it was. Not just arrogance. Not just apathy. Intent. Back in the dining area, Maria had resumed her duties, moving quietly from table to table with a pot of coffee in one hand and a well-practiced smile on her face. Customers responded to her presence with ease, many calling her by name. Paul watched as she knelt beside a table of older women, helping one gently tuck her walker closer to the bench and laughing softly at a joke that seemed to warm the entire table. Contrast, Paul thought. That was the word on repeat in his mind. Contrast. Between people who used their roles to serve and those who used them to dominate. Between the company he had imagined and the one that quietly evolved when he wasn't looking. He returned to his seat, jaw tight. He watched Tyler emerge from the kitchen again, resuming his station like nothing had happened, laughing with a busboy who seemed far more interested in his phone than clearing dirty plates. Then Paul did something he rarely did. He turned to engage a stranger. "Excuse me," he said softly to the man sitting 2 stools down, an older gentleman with white hair and a well-worn coat draped over the stool back. "You come here often?" The man chuckled. "Every day since this place opened. Coffee's weak, but it's home. What do you think of the staff?" Paul asked, fishing casually. The man tilted his head. "Most of them are good folks. That Maria? Sweetest woman you'll ever meet. Helped me find my hearing aids once. Called me a cab when my blood pressure dropped. And the others?" The man grunted. "That kid Tyler? Not a fan. Always seems put out, like customers are bothering him by existing. Saw him throw a tantrum once when someone ordered a milkshake during his cleaning time. Thought the machine was going to break from how hard he slammed it." Paul nodded slowly. "Interesting. You corporate or something?" the man asked suddenly, narrowing his eyes. Paul smiled faintly. "Just a curious customer." The man gave him a long look before returning to his coffee. Paul knew what needed to happen next. He pulled out his phone under the counter and messaged his assistant, Riley. "Need employee performance reports and incident logs for diner number 7. Focus on cashier named Tyler. Also pull Maria's file. Flag anything related to customer comps, complaints, or internal commendations." A minute later, Riley responded. "On it. ETA 1 hour." Paul exhaled. He needed confirmation. Evidence. Something hard and factual that could stand behind what his eyes and ears were already telling him. If Tyler had a history of complaints, or worse, he could be dealt with swiftly. And if Maria had nothing but spotless feedback, then Paul had some big decisions to make. In the meantime, he decided to test the culture further. He stood and walked to the counter, setting down his coffee cup. Jess looked up nervously. "Can I speak to your manager?" he asked calmly. Her eyes widened. She's on a call in the back office, but I can get her if." "No rush," he said with a warm smile. "Just wanted to ask some questions about the staff. You've been helpful." She visibly relaxed. "Thanks." As she turned to fetch Patricia, the manager, Paul noticed Tyler glance up, eyeing him with suspicion. That was fine. Let him squirm. The truth, Paul knew, had a way of unsettling those who'd gotten too comfortable operating in the shadows. He turned back to the window booth, watching the wind gently stir the awning outside and the sign that read Sunny Diner. Families served here. A promise. One that had to mean something. Because if it didn't, then what was all of this for? Patricia, the store manager, emerged from the back room with a clipboard under her arm and stress carved into every line of her face. She wore business casual attire that didn't quite hide the tension in her movements or the bags under her eyes. Paul noticed the way she scanned the dining room before approaching him, more out of obligation than genuine interest. She didn't recognize him, not even a flicker of hesitation or familiarity. It confirmed one of his nagging concerns. The chain had expanded so quickly, middle management no longer had any connection to upper leadership. That distance, he realized, could be dangerous. "Can I help you with something?" Patricia asked as she stopped beside Paul's seat, her voice polite but clipped. "Yes," Paul replied smoothly. "I've been in town for a few days, eating here on and off. Just wanted to ask about your team. I've noticed a few things." Patricia stiffened slightly. "Is there a problem?" "No," he said, shaking his head. "Just curious. That woman over there, Maria." He nodded toward the register where Maria was chatting with a young boy while subtly sneaking him a wrapped biscuit. The boy's eyes lit up. "She seems like a real asset." Patricia glanced in Maria's direction, and for the briefest moment, her expression changed, something between weariness and guarded admiration. "Maria's good with people. She's worked here a long time. Doesn't call out, shows up early, stays late. Customers love her." "But," Paul prompted. Patricia hesitated, her fingers tightening around the edge of her clipboard. "But she crosses lines sometimes. Gives away food when she shouldn't. I've warned her about it, but she says she pays out of pocket when she has to. Still, it's not policy. It messes with inventory. If corporate finds out." "I see." Paul's expression remained neutral, but inside, a storm was brewing. He thanked Patricia and let her return to her tasks, then pulled out his phone as soon as she walked away. "Riley, expedite that report. I need it in 20. "Working on it now?" "Nearly done." Paul pocketed his phone and turned his attention back to Maria. She was now behind the counter restocking cups and organizing the display case, her movements slow but meticulous. Her hands looked dry and calloused from years of working in the food industry, and there was a gentleness in the way she carried herself that reminded Paul of his late mother. He made a decision right then. He needed to speak with her directly, not as a customer, not as a CEO, but as a man who genuinely wanted to understand. He waited until the lunch rush subsided and the crowd thinned. Then, he stood and approached the counter again. "Hi, Maria," he said, leaning forward slightly. She looked up, caught off guard by someone using her name. "Yes. You've been kind to a lot of people today," Paul said, glancing toward the boy who was now sitting quietly, munching on the biscuit she'd given him. "I saw what you did for that child. That wasn't the first time, was it?" Maria blinked. Her instinct was clearly to deflect or deny, but something in Paul's eyes, some unspoken depth, made her pause. She sighed, lowering her voice. "No, it's not. His mom brings him in sometimes after her cleaning shift. She can't always afford much, but the kid's hungry. What do you want me to do? Watch him cry while I ring up a $4 biscuit?" "You shouldn't have to choose between kindness and policy," Paul said quietly. Maria laughed, but it wasn't amusement. It was weary resignation. "Well, that's the world, isn't it? I've been in food service 30 years, mister. I've seen a lot. I've had customers throw food in my face, scream over cold fries, lie to get free meals. But I've also seen people break down in the bathroom because they just lost their job or feed their child first and say they'll eat later. I don't need a policy book to tell me what's right." Paul felt something heavy settle in his chest. "Why do you stay?" She smiled softly. "Because someone has to. Because not everyone has the luxury to walk away. Because this place may not be perfect, but it's mine. These people, even the difficult ones, they're part of my story now. It was then that Paul's phone buzzed. He pulled it out discreetly, seeing a message from Riley. Reports in. Sending to your email. Summary. Maria, spotless record. 10 plus commendations from customers. Covers short tills with her own cash. Never reported for theft or policy violations. Tyler, 4 complaints in last 90 days. 1 pending HR review. Disciplinary warning for aggressive behavior last year. Manager notes confirm tension with coworkers. Paul felt a fire ignite in his gut. It was one thing to suspect injustice. It was another to have the proof. He thanked Maria and excused himself, stepping outside into the cool afternoon air. He dialed Riley immediately. Patch me into the HR lead, he said. And then I want a meeting scheduled with Patricia, Maria, and Tyler first thing tomorrow morning. I'll be back in that diner. And this time, no disguises. He ended the call and stood quietly on the curb for a moment, watching as the breeze picked up leaves from the sidewalk and swirled them around a nearby trash can. He thought about the little boy, about the single mother, about Maria, whose shoulders carried more weight than anyone had given her credit for, and about Tyler, arrogant, unbothered, skating by with just enough charm to avoid consequences. Not anymore. Paul drove back to his hotel in silence, reviewing the full report Riley had sent. He pored over every note, every manager comment, every time-stamped customer complaint. The evidence was clear. The decision was already made. That night, Paul didn't sleep much. He drafted a speech in his head, rehearsing the words he would use to confront the rot festering under the surface of his company. He'd built this business on a promise. That service mattered, that people mattered. Somewhere along the way, that promise had been eroded by policies, metrics, and distance. But tomorrow, he would begin restoring it. And Maria? Maria would never again have to worry about losing her job for doing the right thing. The following morning, Paul Mathers dressed deliberately, no longer hiding behind the scruffy layers of his undercover persona. The tailored navy suit he chose wasn't about intimidation. It was a statement. A symbol of authority reclaimed, of responsibility accepted. He tied his tie with a sense of ceremony, as though preparing not just for a meeting, but for a reckoning. This wasn't going to be a polite executive visit. It was going to be a reckoning for those who had tarnished what he built, in a moment of long overdue recognition for someone who had carried more than her share of the burden in silence. By 8:45 a.m., Paul's black sedan pulled into the lot of the diner. It was still early, but already the sun was rising over the rooftops, casting long golden shadows across the asphalt. Employees were trickling in for their shifts, greeting one another with tired smiles and the mechanical rhythm of routine. None of them noticed the man stepping out of the sedan and walking purposefully toward the front entrance. Patricia was in the manager's office, hunched over the monthly inventory logs, when the knock came. She looked up, startled, and her expression flickered with disbelief when she saw Paul standing in the doorway. Every inch the corporate CEO she had only seen in company newsletters and LinkedIn updates. "Mr. Mathers?" she said, standing up quickly. I didn't know you were coming. We weren't told." "That was intentional," Paul said calmly. "Please, have a seat. We'll be joined shortly." Patricia sat, clearly rattled. Moments later, Maria entered the office at Paul's request, her eyes wary and confused. She was still wearing her apron, her dark brown hair tied back neatly, and her posture stiff with unease. When she saw Paul, her breath caught. Something about him looked familiar now, but not the way she remembered from yesterday. "Maria," Paul said gently, standing to shake her hand. "My name is Paul Mathers. I'm the CEO of this company." Maria's eyes widened, her hand hovering midair. She took it cautiously, her mind racing. "You were here yesterday. You were the man who asked about the little boy." "I was," Paul confirmed, nodding. "And I saw much more than that." Patricia's mouth opened slightly, her face flushing with realization. "You were undercover?" Paul nodded. "For 2 days. Long enough to witness the kind of culture that's taken root here, good and bad." Before either woman could speak again, the door opened, and Tyler stepped in. He looked smug, the confidence of someone who believed he had the system figured out. But that smirk faltered as soon as he saw Paul seated at the head of the room. "Oh," he said, blinking. "Didn't realize we were having corporate drop-ins this morning." "Have a seat, Tyler," Paul said coolly. The silence that followed was heavy. Paul let it linger before speaking, ensuring every word landed with full weight. I built this company 10 years ago with one goal in mind: to create places where everyday people could be treated with dignity, both employees and customers. We've expanded fast, and with that growth came systems and oversight. But somewhere along the way, something slipped. I saw it yesterday, in this very building. He turned to Patricia first. You've been managing this location for 3 years. On paper, your performance metrics are solid. No glaring losses, inventory mostly reconciled, staffing relatively stable. But numbers lie. And what I saw here yesterday wasn't a well-run store. It was a strained team barely holding it together. It was overworked cashiers skipping breaks. It was ignored customer complaints and policies used as weapons instead of guidelines. Patricia's face reddened, but she said nothing. Now let's talk about behavior. Paul continued, turning to Tyler. You were directly involved in a situation that gave rise to several red flags. You refused a refund to a customer who had a valid receipt, escalated the matter to the point of near confrontation, and mocked a child and his mother within earshot of staff and customers. You've also been mentioned in 4 customer complaints, 2 of which reference language I won't repeat in this room. Tyler shifted in his seat. Look, maybe I was a little blunt, but it's not against the rules to enforce policy. No, Paul interrupted, his voice sharp. But it is against the rules to weaponize it, to belittle people, to make coworkers feel unsafe or unsupported. What I saw and heard wasn't about bluntness. It was bullying, plain and simple. He let that sink in before turning to Maria. And then there's you. Maria froze, unsure if she should brace for reprimand or gratitude. I saw you quietly feed a hungry child. I saw you calm a panicked mother. I saw you run the register, stock the cups, clean spills, and guide a new employee, all while being told you were too emotional or giving away product without permission. I read your file, Maria. Not a single warning in 9 years. More commendations from customers than any other employee in this region. And still, here you are, afraid to lose your job for doing the right thing. Maria's throat tightened, but she managed a whisper. Thank you. Paul exhaled slowly. Then, he stood. Effective immediately, Tyler, you are terminated from this company. You will receive your final paycheck and severance package per HR policy, but you will not return to this store. Your behavior, while subtle enough to dodge serious consequence until now, ends here. Tyler's jaw dropped. What? You can't be serious. I'm very serious, Paul said. And Patricia, you'll remain in your role for now, but you are on a 90-day probationary review. We'll be sending a temporary regional supervisor to oversee operations until we determine the long-term leadership plan here. Understood. Patricia nodded stiffly, unable to meet his gaze. Paul then turned to Maria. As of today, Maria, you are the new assistant general manager of this location. You will receive a pay increase, benefits review, and an opportunity to complete the corporate leadership program. If you choose to accept, you'll have the chance to apply for full management within 6 months. Maria blinked, stunned. I don't know what to say. Paul smiled. Just say you'll stay. A tear slipped down Maria's cheek, but she nodded, her voice cracking. I'll stay. As the meeting wrapped, Paul didn't rush. He let them sit in the silence of the moment, each one processing what had just happened. When they finally stood, he shook Maria's hand again and said, What you did was brave. More than that, it was right. Don't ever let anyone make you feel wrong for caring. Before he left, Paul addressed the full staff on the floor. He gathered them near the dining room and spoke plainly. No rehearsed speeches. No corporate fluff. I'm here today because I forgot to stay connected. I trusted numbers, systems, and distance too much. But not anymore. From now on, we'll be doing things differently, starting right here, with you. The applause that followed wasn't loud or theatrical. It was honest, worn, and deeply grateful. Paul walked out of the diner knowing one thing for sure. The hardest part was still ahead, rebuilding trust across the company. But this was the first real step. 3 weeks had passed since Paul Mathers walked into one of his own locations undercover and exposed a system that had failed the very people it was supposed to protect. In that time, a ripple had become a wave. What started as a single act of courage from a cashier named Maria had sparked a chain reaction, not only at her location, but across the entire company. Paul wasn't just watching from his corner office anymore. He was traveling, listening, learning. What he had seen with his own eyes couldn't be unseen. The polished reports and hollow quarterly summaries suddenly felt sterile and inadequate. So he tore up the old playbook and started writing a new one. It began with Maria. Her first days as assistant general manager were filled with growing pains. She was nervous about stepping into a leadership role, unsure if her years behind the register had really prepared her for managing a full team. But Paul wasn't just promoting her for loyalty or kindness. He had seen her manage chaos with calm, solve problems on the fly, and hold her team together with empathy. Those were the qualities that mattered most now. Her first big challenge came the following Monday morning. A truck carrying essential supplies had been rerouted due to a logistics error, leaving their store short on key inventory items. In the past, this would have fallen on Patricia's desk or been ignored entirely until customers started complaining. But this time, Maria took charge. She coordinated with nearby branches, secured emergency inventory from a warehouse, and worked with Connor, a now-promoted team lead, to reorganize displays so that customers never even noticed the disruption. Paul heard about the incident not from Maria, but from a customer who sent an email to corporate headquarters. "I don't know who your new manager is, but this store has completely transformed. It feels like people actually care here again." And that was the kind of feedback Paul was now prioritizing. He implemented sweeping changes across the company, starting with a new compassion and integrity initiative. It wasn't just another corporate slogan. It was a living, breathing framework that reshaped hiring, training, and evaluation processes. Every store would now include monthly community impact check-ins, where employees could nominate peers for acts of service, kindness, or resilience. Those employees would receive public recognition and bonuses, not for sales numbers or speed, but for heart. Paul also introduced an emergency assistance fund, a project inspired directly by what Maria had done for the young mother and her son. Employees could now apply anonymously for small grants to cover emergency needs, groceries, rent shortfalls, childcare. No questions asked, no HR loopholes, just trust. It wasn't a perfect system, but it was real. Back at the diner, the atmosphere was unrecognizable from the one Paul had encountered weeks prior. The sharp-edged tension was gone. Smiles came easier. Music played softly in the mornings. Connor and Maria had built a new rhythm together, leading with quiet confidence and mutual respect. Staff turnover dropped dramatically in just 30 days, and customer reviews skyrocketed. But the true test of the transformation came one rainy Thursday afternoon. A familiar woman stepped through the door, her coat soaked from the storm, her young son in tow. It was the same mother Maria had helped weeks ago, the same boy who had quietly wept behind the counter while his mother argued for a refund she didn't receive. Maria spotted her instantly. "Mrs. Reynolds," she said warmly, "you're back." The woman smiled. "I was nervous, honestly. After what happened last time." Maria stepped forward. "A lot has changed since then." "I can see that," the woman said, nodding toward the staff. "It feels lighter, safer." She hesitated, then reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "This is for you. I know it probably doesn't come close, but I never forgot what you did. You didn't have to feed my son. You didn't have to risk your job for us." Maria shook her head. "You don't have to. I want to," she said, "because it meant something. And I wanted you to know that we're okay now. I got a job. Things are still tight, but we're okay." Maria took the envelope and, to her surprise, found a handwritten card inside along with a photograph of the boy holding a small puppy. "We adopted him 2 weeks ago," the woman said with tears in her eyes. "My son named him Hero. Because of you." Maria choked on a laugh. "Hero?" The woman nodded. "I told him what happened, and he said, 'That lady at the diner? She's a hero.'" Word of the encounter reached Paul that same evening. He didn't respond with a corporate reply or a PR campaign. Instead, he quietly printed out the photo and placed it in a frame in his office. Underneath it, he wrote, "Sometimes the real change begins with a sandwich and a soft word." Weeks turned into months, and the story of Maria's act became the cornerstone of the company's annual summit. Paul stood before hundreds of employees in a downtown convention hall, not in a tuxedo or branded blazer, but in a simple button-down and slacks, hands in his pockets, just a man talking to his people. "I went undercover to fix numbers," he said. "But what I found was a broken culture. And it wasn't until I saw one woman quietly feed a hungry child that I realized we had forgotten who we were. But we're remembering now, thanks to her. He invited Maria onto the stage to a standing ovation. She stood nervously, not used to the spotlight. But as Paul handed her a plaque engraved with the title Heart of the Company Award, she beamed with a quiet grace that silenced the room. Later that night, Paul stood alone on the venue balcony, sipping a coffee, staring out at the city lights. He thought about the journey, about how easy it had been to drift away from the core values that once defined his company, about how dangerous comfort could be for leaders, and about how grateful he was for that one ordinary day when he walked into a store and saw something extraordinary. His phone buzzed with a text from Connor. Maria says thank you again. She's crying happy tears in the break room. We're all proud today, and hopeful, more than ever. Paul smiled and typed back, "You've all earned it. Let's keep going." And that's exactly what they did.